Thank you all for coming out tonight. I'll try to make this as painless as possible. But it is going to hurt. So, like the man said, my name is Thomas Hubbard, and I hope y'all can hear me. And I almost always start my readings with this poem because it's the way I start my days, and it's in this book, which happens to be available. But I'm going to read it off this paper because I'm an old man and I can't see very well, and my hearing is even worse, and I should have washed my glasses before I came up here. Before I waken, shiny black feathered ponies soar over mountains toward father-son's early colors, and that smiling woman who guards the path between this world and others. She dances across the sky, stepping to painted drums, her blanket blowing loose, revealing flashes of her coppery skin, luring me into still another day. And we'll get on down to business here. When you get old, it's hard to keep track of your papers because you've got so damn many of them. And they want to shake around in your hand, and it's just a hard world. Anyway, I've lived in Seattle before, and I left Seattle a couple of times. The last time I left, I went to Arkansas and bought a cabin in the woods, and it was a good time for about 8 years, but I kept coming back to Seattle 3 or 4 times a year, so I finally gave up and sold the place. I used to live in a neighborhood called Lower Queen Anne. Queen Anne Avenue ran through Lower Queen Anne and ran up a long, steep hill to Queen Anne. Lower Queen Anne was that kind of a neighborhood. I used to walk to Queen Anne Avenue on Sunday mornings, sit up in a coffee shop drinking coffee and reading a funny paper somebody might have left on a seat and watching. And one Sunday morning I saw this guy. So this fella sits down right now, Sunday morning at one of the outside tables, smoking a cigarette, drinking a paper cup of coffee that happens to be from a different stand down the street. And his orange, yellow, and white striped trousers argue with the electric lime green rain jacket he wears over a dark blue hooded sweatshirt. Cheap running shoes and whiskers complete his outfit, and he may be well into his 50s. Lines on his face. Oh my God, the lines on that man's face. The lines on his face tell of new starts that didn't work. Lines on his face tell of damp-skinned mornings beside a woman he needed to escape. And the lines tell of the realization that the love of his life would not be coming back, ever. Lines on his face tell of leaving home. I don't mean leaving the cheap room where he was probably staying. I mean leaving the very concept, the idea of home, leaving it behind. And the lines on his face speak softly of gathering determination to make it through another day. He looks from side to side, glancing around, his hands fidgeting on his crossed knees as he sits there outside. One cheap running shoe on the concrete while the other one is kind of dangling in the air. White cotton sock top showing. He begins talking to nobody. Or perhaps he's talking to the world. And then suddenly he's gone. He's walking slowly and carefully up Queen Anne Avenue, up that hill, walking past apartment buildings that he wouldn't be able to get in if he had a whole pocket full of money. They wouldn't let him in. He's gone, walking slowly up that hill, and all the lunches his mother may have made for him, the meals he sat down to, the conversations, close shaves he escaped and those he didn't, ball games he played, scenes he saw, songs he sang, kites he flew, lovers he knew, the dogs of his childhood, new toys, lessons in school, days he skipped, and the buddies that he skipped with, letters he might have written, cars he wrecked or wore out, cold nights he shivered and wished for family, alone. All those gone with him up that hill, stuffed inside the hood of that old blue sweatshirt and headed for whatever the day might offer. That guy was somebody's little boy at one time. This looks like a pretty young group of people, mostly. Anybody in here ever heard of Muddy Waters? Oh, right. It's just like being at home. Everybody at my home has heard of Muddy Waters. I live by myself. So I want to tell you something about poetry that you already know. And you know, it's really fun for people to tell you stuff that you already know. That's why I listen to MSNBC every night. I already know about that stuff. Okay, two ways of gathering material for a poem or a piece of writing or whatever. One way is from direct observation. I see it and I write it. And the other way is from doing some research. Reading, finding out. You can write about stuff that was happening before you were born. And I've got a poem from direct observation and a poem of Kevin Koval's. And both poems are about muddy waters. And I'm going to read Kevin's first. Kevin Koval is an old slam poet in Chicago. And he's kind of retired from slams. He's teaching kids how to slam, how to write, how to express themselves in writing. They're working with kids. He's got about 10 books. Anyhow, here's Kevin Koval's poem about muddy waters. Bars and rent parties roar, motherfuckers won't shut up. The acoustic guitar, an impotent whimper in the throat of war machines. Some country shit just won't cut it. Muddy is slick like his hair, like puddles and creeks he played in when he was a kid in Clarksdale, a long way from sharecropping and his dead mama. He drives a truck delivering Venetian blinds, and he works in a paper mill making lumber lay like linen. Uncle Joe got him an axe with fangs. He plugged in and shook fire out, and the amp spit licks that wrapped around necks of Macs talking weak game and zip. Fuck a pig. It reminded him too much of Mississippi. Pluck this metal with hands that work the earth, that call folk home and throw them through the future. Out a plate glass window, maybe. He conjured a time machine. White boys tried to pick up Muddy's music, but they couldn't access its black magic. Clapton was a poor mimic. The Stones were a colonial bore. McKinley Morganfield, his given name. McKinley Morganfield sits up on a stool around 43rd Street, shoots lightning out his fingers, a jolt from the city. He makes the blues jump. He shocks the world. And here's another piece about muddy waters from direct observation. First teaching job I got, because I've been in SDS, happened to be in Gary, Indiana. And so we used to go cross over into Chicago, and this is about going over there to hear Muddy Waters in a little hippie coffee shop, about like this one, called Peckerwood Whiskey. The grand old master drank Peckerwood whiskey between sets that night, although the men who made it, working men, good enough men in their own right, would have called him by that name. Not his given name, McKinley Morganfield, nor his stage name, Muddy Waters, but that ugly name that would have made his mother wince, would have made his father turn away. Yes, Muddy Waters drank, then wiped his chin, set that quart of 10 high back on the table, grinned at the woman with him there in her little room behind the bandstand, and said something I couldn't hear from where I sat on the floor toward the front of the audience. We had all paid $2 or $3 to hear some blues and to pass joints and cheap wine, which was okay in the little Chicago hippie coffee house that night so soon after we had tenderly carried home our beaten revolution. 1969. Even the Chicago cops had eased up. And just as his hard-driving songs moved us, his calm, sad face soothed us and consoled our grief at having lost before most of us even realized that challenging the criminals in our government was not a game. Well, Muddy Waters drank that Peckerwood whiskey, and he carried his guitar back out on the stand, played some more blues for us, and to smile on us like a loving father who foresees continuing vicissitudes for his children, but faithful in strength they don't yet know they have, sends them right ahead on into the world. And moving right along with these papers that keep shaking. I don't know why they do that. The last place I lived in Seattle before I moved away this last time, I rented leased a cabin up on Colony Mountain, south of Bellingham. And while I was up there, I washed my clothes in a little laundromat down in Mount Vernon. And I wrote this piece in that laundromat. And the title is, Buenas tardes, señora pariente lejana. And underneath it says, queda claro porque tan pocas veces podemos ver jóvenes chicanos sin sus ropas limpiar y planchados. It becomes clear why we seldom see young Chicanos without clean, pressed clothes. She steps hard-jawed into the laundromat, back out and in again, quickly, all business with baskets of clothes for the washers and dryers to be sorted judiciously and fed along with scrimpy quarters into machines she can't afford for home. Years of making do and the gravity of labor weigh down her cheeks, her breasts, while age has thickened her middle, and still, as through some miracle of intent, she holds that line, that appearance for the world with fresh clothing, a hint of makeup, laundering clothes for her family. She's a nation of brownskins, speaking language of their long-ago oppressors, but blending native ways into the foreign forced cathedrals that would separate humans from the world. Thus we preserve bits of heritage. She stands there north of imaginary lines sketched on our earth by the invaders and sorts clothing that, laundered and pressed, will show the world a resilience, a will to survive, a history impossible to erase, and a strength residing in the blood. And another one. I don't want to offend anybody here, but this is titled The Real Uncle Sam. After the last good war, GIs came home, raised hell for a while, found a wife and looked around for a home. Markets provided prefabricated house kits, delivered to your lot. Prefabs. A few of them are still around. Buy them on the GI Bill, put them up in a few days. Cracker box houses. Square, plain, 2 bedrooms, kitchen, bath, and living room. Plywood. A few of them are still around. Cracker box houses. Tonight, somewhere in an American suburb, maybe in a Midwest town, on the gravel drive of a ramshackle cracker box house, an aging beater car stands among tall weeds, waiting. Sometimes late at night, an old man steps out of that house and he glances up at distant stars and a bruise-colored sky. Then he carries a paper bag to the car and climbs inside. Sitting in the driver's seat of his beater car, he opens the bag and removes the first of a 6-pack. And he opens the can and he sips, and from far across the evening whiffs the sound of a brass band blowing Stars and Stripes Forever. Ba 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 ba. Yeah, you know that song. That same brass band played while history unfolded, while governments offered cash bounties for dead Indians, while humans were kidnapped in Africa, brought across the sea and sold as slaves to help build the USA on this stolen land. That same brass band, my friends, played on while Andrew Jackson gave our tribal land to slaveholders. Same band kept on playing while 7th Cavalry murdered those Indian families on the plains, while secret agents trained Central American death squads. That band was jamming while crooked voting machines put a bogus president in office, while chicken shit police at protests taped over their name tags. Kept on playing while secret torture chambers produced phony evidence and while cops murdered unarmed men, women, even kids. And that band kept right on blowing Stars and Stripes while cockroaches carried tiki torches in the bloody streets, while the country that old man once fought for became the next Third Reich. And now, floating through the polluted evening air comes the sound of that same old brass band. Broken-hearted, way out of tune, faintly blowing Stars and Stripes Forever, slow as a funeral dirge. That old man sits behind the wheel of his beater car and he opens another can of beer there along a midnight street in a fading neighborhood. And right there behind the wheel of that car sits the real Uncle Sam. Way past middle age. 6-pack beside him, cigarette in hand, chain smoking, wondering how in the hell it ever got this way. Realizing down inside, nothing much has changed. Anybody here been to the Bai Pai Lounge? It's a little Thai restaurant up on 65th Northeast in Ravenna District. And there used to be a pretty nice poetry venue there. It was almost as nice as this one. Here's a piece about what happened one night there, poetry night at the Bai Pai Lounge. It's about an elderly woman and a bartender and a friend of mine and myself, and it goes like this. Her strong voice commands the room, surprising in the light of white hair, aging frame, as this poet, this old woman poet, reads a poem of sexual betrayal, and the young barkeep's eyes register recognition, emotion, even as his stony countenance attempts disinterest. And he bends into the light to wash glassware. A poker-faced bartender myself years ago, as I worked my way through the university, I can't help but notice, and I asked my friend sitting there with me, which side of love's disappointment does she suppose this fellow might have occupied to be so vulnerable to an old woman's words? My friend reminds me, she says, even in adolescence, many of us have already visited most angles of that three-sided situation. And I agree. And a tale of my own years passed behind a bar spills forth, and something I witnessed bringing long-gone characters alive to play it out again. The poem passes, the woman sits down, glasses are washed, drinks served by this kid whose hard eyes softened momentarily at hearing how the sharp corners of that ageless triangle ripped through the youth of a grandmotherly soul. And there will surely come a time when he calls back to life this night, that poet, her poem, and the rest of us as supporting actors for just one more telling. Right behind that, a piece called Attraction. Now, anybody who's got a spouse and a nice home and some kids, a couple cars in the driveway and a dog and a cat on the couch, that's just fine. You know, I used to do that. But that's not what this piece is about. Attraction. He is writing a hard turn of luck that's lasted too long. Nothing to do but write it out, try to keep a fire. She sees her castles burn and finally fall, but she knows when you give up, they just keep on kicking you. The two come together, and who's to say that mutual ache they both have for being understood even now in their faintest times? Who's to say their need is not like guitar strings vibrating in harmony with one another? They are reciprocal even before the first exchange of names. Even before their eyes ever meet, they are reciprocal. Both recognize the attraction as transitory, a bird that will soon take flight. They need only to touch for a night. Those who view such a tryst as a lesser thing must surely live a narrow life, having never taken the chances and suffered the losses or wins that bring such a meeting. What these two feel is not domestic, but rather the comfort of understanding and being understood in the right now, a searing flash of wild love. Goodbye will be a smile, a lingering glance they will remember, and both will find shelter in the memory for years. Oh, this piece. I hope my time is holding up okay.
What do you think?
Fat yellow moon. And the fat yellow moon, round as a tortilla, gazes down on our foolishness with the same face that smiles on our arts, the same grandmotherly countenance that smiles on the once beautiful Rio Grande. How will she look down on the wall? And here's a piece, this is the last piece I'm going to read this evening, I believe. I was going to share one with you from Charles Bukowski, but I'm just going to read this one and get on out of here and get me another cup of coffee and then get on out of here. Half moon, one Sunday evening. Since I'm cutting it kind of short, I can tell you, my partner, whose guest room I'm living in right now, my friend, she's not a partner anymore. What kind of partners? You know, it's hard to explain things like that. Anyhow, anyhow, she was down in Los Angeles to visit her grandchildren, and she said, Thomas, come on down. I've rented a B&B down in Venice. No, what's that town?
Venice.
Venice. And she had this Airbnb rented in Venice, and I got to stay with her for about 10 days. And it was cool. And I went down to the beach. Anyhow, I got this piece out of it. Half moon, one Sunday evening. She's up there behind LA. Oh, I gotta back up here a minute. I have to tell you this. The path is formed as we walk on it. That's from Zhuang Tzu. He was a Chinese man a long, long, long time ago. The path is formed as we walk on it. And she's up there behind LA fog, floating across the sea of sadness as she gazes ruefully down on the pain and suffering imposed by the world's richest. Grandmother Moon looks on and perhaps weeps a bit, but then she recalls the guillotines of Paris, the hard fates of Mussolini, of Hitler, and of those with more greed than compassion. My cousins and I look to the sky, wishing to believe stories about grandmother's dark side, peering into a future, seeking justice. But she only looks, only sees. The rest is up to us. Thank you for coming out.